welcome to the Congressional Party. First off, let me start by apologizing for the quality of my first video. It wasn't very good, and I just wanted to say I'm a 40-plus-year-old guy with no video editing or social media skills whatsoever, and that was pretty obvious. And these videos are a lot harder to make than they look, so kudos to you YouTubers that make it look so easy. But fortunately for me, if there's one thing I know about the online community, it's they're famous for their patience and their understanding and their ability to engage with an argument based on the nuances and the substance of that argument, rather than nitpicking little things like, video quality or audio quality. So, should be fine, right? Alright, so if I'm proposing that we should start a party of moderates for moderates, then I just wanted to take a little bit of time here and talk about what it means to be a moderate, according, just to me. Not trying to imply that you don't know what a moderate is, but I would say that in the last few decades, what a moderate is has been defined by a political and a media elite that is itself increasingly more partisan and increasingly more extreme. And so maybe their definition is not as fair as it should be. And so I just want to talk a little bit about what I think about being a moderate from my own experience. And it's just whatever's floating around in the old noggin up here. So if you disagree, that's fine. If you have anything else you want to add, that's cool. Because if there's one thing a moderate knows, it's that it's okay to disagree sometimes. So let's start with what a moderate isn't. Because I think sometimes moderates get labeled or saddled with characteristics that aren't necessarily fair or don't really even apply. And the first one I think I want to address is that, a moderate isn't necessarily a centrist. By which I mean, you can't simply split the difference between liberal and conservative and say that's where all moderates are going to fall in the political spectrum. You can't just take the Democratic position, add the Republican position, divide by 2, and say that's what it means to be a moderate. Where a moderate lands on any given issue is going to vary. In some issues, a moderate might be more to the left of an issue, or they may be more to the right on another issue, and they can land directly in the middle for a third issue. Moderates are going to use their own histories and backgrounds and core beliefs to come up with where they stand on any given issue. So where a moderate lands on that issue is going to be completely up to that moderate. And that means moderates may not operate as a single voting bloc on any given issue. Moderates are a diverse group of people with varying views and ideas and identity. But where we are united, I think, is in our desire to do good for the country and to come up with the best solutions for the country that will make us all be better. Moderates are able to listen to the facts and listen to other people's arguments and then come to the most reasonable solution, the solution that makes the most sense. And the second thing that a moderate is not someone who's just indecisive or can't make up their own mind, or a flip-flopper or a Wembley. We're not moderate just because we can't make up our own mind between the two parties. In fact, we're moderate because we can make up our own minds. We don't need an outside source telling us what we believe because we already know what we believe. We have our own core beliefs, our own sense of purpose and morality. And yeah, we're willing to listen to others and maybe even adjust our position based on information that we get from another individual. But that doesn't mean we're weak or we lack conviction or courage. Because you know what takes real conviction? You know what takes real courage? Is being willing to be persuaded by another argument that may run counter to what you initially believed. And accepting that change because it's the best, because it's the truth. Another thing that represents courage and conviction is being willing to give up a little something in order to get the most of what you want. Being willing to give up 10% of what you want to get 90% of what we need is a courageous and a principled stand. But right now, neither the Republicans nor the Democrats are willing to do that, are they? For both parties, it's 100% my way or the highway. We're not giving an inch. And that is no way to run the government. That's no way to run Congress. And it's detrimental for our nation. And that's what it means to be a moderate. A moderate is someone who's reasonable. And by reasonable, I mean someone who's governed by reason instead of dogma or ideology. The Democrats and the Republicans, they already know how they feel about every single issue. You can't work with that because they'll shut down any argument before you even open your mouth to make the argument. And that's not reasonable. That's not even fully sane. That's pretty much just having a conversation with yourself. Whereas a moderate is someone who embraces common sense, logic, reason, and will use those tools to come to the most reasonable solution. And when we do come to that solution, we're willing to ask the difficult questions about that solution. Questions like, how much is this going to cost? Is that cost going to be worth it? Are there likely to be any unintended consequences as a result of this action? Is this going to be fair and just for everyone involved? And by asking those difficult questions, we're willing to adjust, change, or even drop the solution if the answer to any of those questions aren't acceptable. Because when you come up with a solution, the one thing you want to avoid is making the situation worse over the long run. And that's one of the problems that we're currently facing. The two parties are much more interested in getting the shortest solution, the one that's easiest to understand and easiest to explain, the one that's going to score them the most political points in the next upcoming election, regardless of whether or not that solution is actually the best solution for that problem. And when you do that, you are failing to plan for the future. And when I was in the Army, they had a saying for that. They said, failing to plan is planning to fail. And besides just being reasonable and having and using our common sense, a moderate is also someone who is capable of and in favor of compromise. And that's important because the two parties today, they use compromise as if it's a bad word, as if it's something to be ashamed of, something to be avoided. And of course they do. Because they spend all day, every day, telling anybody who will listen how terrible, how incompetent, how awful the other party is. And if the other party is terrible and incompetent and awful, then any compromise with them would also be incompetent and terrible and awful. And so they're against any type of compromise, which is why we need a moderate congressional party, a middle party, a party that can act as a conduit between the Republicans and the Democrats so that they can come together and get some compromising done and actually get something passed that will solve the problems that we're facing. Only with a third party can we get back to the ability to compromise in Congress. Because whether you like it or not, compromise is in fact an essential part of the problem-solving process. Our democracy, our nation, our Constitution was all based off of compromise. Unfortunately, a good deal of that compromise centered around the institution of slavery, so maybe not the best thing to compromise about, but it was necessary for the creation of our government, and it's something that we need to still embrace. So when the parties poo-poo compromise, they are poo-pooing not only our founding fathers and our Constitution, but they are poo-pooing the mere idea of trying to solve the problems that we have. And that's not acceptable. And another thing about moderates is that moderates are fair. You could call us the Superman Party, like as a nickname, because a moderate is someone who believes in truth, justice, and the American way. So long as that American way focuses on truth and justice and not primarily bombing things. And that fairness is at the root of what it means to be a moderate. Because I don't know if you've ever heard anyone, on the news when they're trying to defend a piece of legislation or something, and someone says, but that's not fair. And the moderator, someone says, life's not fair, son. Grow up. Don't live in your childish little worlds, because just life isn't fair. And to those people, I can only say, what? What are you talking about? Okay, to be fair, technically speaking, that is a true statement. Life is in fact not fair. Life is not fair because in life you could get hit by a bus. You could come down with Parkinson's disease. You could lose your dog, right? Life is random and therefore it is inherently unfair. But the government that we created and the laws that we pass, those are specifically designed to be fair. Because throughout most of human history, the government was decidedly unfair. Mostly because it's centered around the primary premise that he who murders the best gets to make the rules. And that is not necessarily a recipe for fairness and justice. But at some point in the late 18th century, a group of plucky little rebels got together and said, hey, I got an idea. What if, stay with me, what if the government was actually fair? And sure, they still had the institution of slavery, and so maybe not fair for everybody, maybe not perfect at the first go-around, but still, the idea that the government should in fact be fair was unique, was the first in the world. And that's what we need to maintain. We need to keep the idea that any legislation passed must at its core be fair. It must include liberty and justice for all, period. Which means you can't suppress the minority at the will of the majority, and nor can you disenfranchise the majority because of some powerful minority. Moderates demand justice and fairness for everyone. And justice should be blind, in fact. It doesn't matter who you are. The government should work equally well for everyone, because fair is fair, regardless of your economic status, your race, your religion, your gender, your blah blah, etc., etc. What's good for the goose is in fact good for the gander. If it's good enough for me, it should be good enough for everyone. There's nothing more heinous than to benefit yourself at the detriment of others, to give to the goose but to deny the gander. That's just plain wrong. So those are the characters I would say that most importantly define me as a moderate. A person who's reasonable, who uses common sense and logic and reason over ideology and dogma. A person who's willing to compromise to come up with the best solution possible, or at least the best solution that can pass Congress and be signed into law by the president. I believe I'm a person who believes in truth, justice, and the American way. And someone who would put those traits and hold those core beliefs before politics, before winning an election, and before the party. Now, I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there who would say, wait a second, I'm fair, I'm reasonable, and I'm still a proud, devout Democrat or a proud, devout Republican. To which I can only respond, really? 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 So what you're seeing in the news, that looks reasonable to you, right? How these parties are operating right now, that seems like it's rooted in common sense and a deep-seated pursuit of justice and fairness for the nation. Really? And if that person says yes, then fine. So fine, so be it. However, you my friend, are not a moderate. You're just not. And that's fine. Not everyone should be moderate. Not everyone will be moderate. Not by any means. But if you look at the actions taken by the Republicans and the Democratic parties today, and you think that they're being reasonable, I'm not talking to you right now. I mean, you're not the intended demographic for these videos. Which once again, that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly okay, because I'm not trying to eliminate either party. I'm not trying to replace or destroy the Republican or the Democratic parties. I just believe by inserting a moderate third party, we will improve the political system in which those two parties operate, and that it will in fact improve both parties and our political system overall. But there are millions and millions of Americans who do not think that the Democrats or the Republicans are being reasonable at this point in time. There are millions of people I know, well, I mean, I don't know millions personally, but I'm willing to bet that there are millions of people who very strongly disagree with the actions that those parties are taking. And sure, there are plenty of those people who are still in the parties and consider themselves moderates. There's moderate Republicans and there are moderate Democrats, absolutely. But guys, you have to know your parties are leaving you. They're stranding you. The moderate Republican and the moderate Democrat are becoming an endangered species because they keep moving away from where you are. And there's still millions of other Americans who never felt at home in either of the parties. And those are the independent voters. They've never had a home in which to hang their political hats because they've never felt like they belonged in either of those parties. And so it's to you I'm speaking. It's to you, the moderate Democrat, the moderate Republican, and the independent voters. You guys are the intended demographic for these videos. Because you are the hope for America. You're the ones who are going to be responsible to fix the mess that we're currently in. Because remember, they left us. We didn't leave them. The Democrats and the Republicans, they turned their backs on moderates and drifted off to their right and their left. They're the ones who abandoned moderation. They're the ones who abandoned reason in exchange for open warfare on one another. And we the moderates, are the casualties of that war. But I say that now it's time for the victims to become the victors. Because we're the majority. We have the advantage. We have the numbers. And as they insist on drifting ever further to their left and their right, then we have the obligation, nay, the solemn duty, to set up camp in the middle that they've abandoned. Because only then, only can a moderate party restore the balance in our political system. And only by restoring the balance can we fix the problems that we have and move the country forward again. But we can only do so if we unite. If we unite under one banner and together with one voice say, enough! Enough of this! I've already warned you twice, and that's it. I'm turning this car around and going back home. And when we get there, I want you to go straight to your rooms and think about what you did. And you can come out when you are good and ready to apologize. Because somebody needs to be the adult in this situation. Somebody needs to play the role of the grown-ups while they are acting like kids. Now is the time for us to come together and to form a unity that puts country before party, that works to reestablish the authority of Congress and to make Congress do the things it's supposed to do to effectively run the government. So join me, won't you? Join me in this great experiment, and let's see if we can make a difference in our country. So thanks again for listening to me rant. Once again, I'm pretty sure no one's ever going to see these. But if you did, thanks. I really appreciate it. Especially if you got to this point. If you watched the video and got to this point in that video, even if you disagreed with everything I said, and even if you thought I'm a complete idiot, you must have at least intellectually engaged with the arguments that I'm making. And that would be pretty cool. That would be pretty cool. So once again, thanks, and I apologize for the quality. I hope this one comes out looking a little bit better, but I promise to try to get better with each video that I make. So join me next time when I want to take a look at third parties in America. What are some of the obstacles to third parties? Why don't we see more successful third parties in America, in our political system, in our election system? What are those obstacles, and can some of those obstacles actually be advantages for the Congressional Party? So I'll see you then, and remember, I need to come up with a sign-off or something, because I got nothing. So, bye.